The glass shattered, but no one moved. In the VIP section of New York's most exclusive restaurant, a billion-dollar deal was seconds away from being signed. Julian Thorne, the city's most ruthless tech mogul, was about to hand over his fortune for a rare German artifact. He thought he was winning. He didn't know he was walking into a trap that would ruin him. The only person who saw the truth was the one person no one looked at. The waitress refilling his water glass. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't supposed to understand. But when she leaned in and whispered 4 words in flawless German, the silence was deafening. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash the city clean. It just made the neon lights bleed into the asphalt. Inside L'Etoile, arguably the most pretentious French restaurant on the Upper East Side, the rain was nothing more than a muffled drumming against bulletproof glass. Inside, the air smelled of truffle oil, aged cognac, and old money. Ilara Vance adjusted the collar of her uniform. It was stiff, starched to an inch of its life, and chafed against her neck. She checked her reflection in the polished brass of the service station. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe bun, her face scrubbed free of makeup, her blue eyes lowered. This was the armor of the invisible. At 24, Ilara was a ghost. To the patrons of L'Etoile, she was a pair of hands that delivered plates and a shadow that refilled wine glasses. They didn't know that 4 years ago she had been top of her class in art history at Heidelberg University. They didn't know her father had been one of the world's premier antique horologists until the scandal that destroyed him, and their family fortune. Now she was just server number 4. Table 9 needs water. Now, Vance, Henry, the floor manager, hissed, snapping his fingers near her ear. Henry was a small man with a Napoleon complex and a cheap toupee. And don't make eye contact. It's Mr. Thorne. Ilara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Julian Thorne. Even in a room full of sharks, he was the Great White. At 32, he had monopolized the semiconductor industry and was now aggressively moving into collecting rare European antiquities. He was known for 2 things: his icy temper and his refusal to ever be told no. She picked up the crystal pitcher, the condensation cold against her palm, and moved toward the corner booth. Table 9 was secluded, draped in shadows that cost extra. Julian Thorne sat with his back to the wall. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that felt dangerous. Sharp jawline, eyes the color of slate, and a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ilara's entire year of rent. Sitting opposite him was a man Ilara didn't recognize, but immediately disliked. He was older, heavy-set, with a face that was too red and a smile that was too wide. He wore a velvet blazer that was trying too hard. "I assure you, Herr Thorne," the man said, his accent thick and slippery. "The Kaiser's heart has not been seen since 1918. My sources in Munich had to bleed to get this out of the vault." Ilara approached the table silently, her training kicking in. Pour from the right. Do not hover. Do not breathe. "I don't care about the blood, Franz," Julian said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that commanded attention without raising volume. "I care about the authenticity. You're asking for $15 million for a pocket watch." Franz Weber, the name sounded fake even to Ilara's ears, chuckled nervously. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped bundle. "Not just a watch, Mr. Thorne. A piece of time itself, commissioned for Wilhelm II. It is the only one of its kind using the lost escapement mechanism." Ilara poured the water into Julian's glass. Her hand was steady, but her heart hammered against her ribs. The Kaiser's heart. She knew that name. Her father had written a paper on it. It was a myth, a ghost story in the world of horology. It was supposed to have a double-axis tourbillon, a mechanical impossibility for its time. Franz unwrapped the cloth. There it lay on the white tablecloth. Gold, heavy, intricate. It gleamed under the dim chandelier light. It was beautiful. Julian leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He picked up a jeweler's loupe from the table. If this is real, the serial number inside the casing should match the Romanov archives. Of course, Franz said, sweating slightly despite the air conditioning. But we cannot open the case here. The mechanism is too delicate for the humidity. You buy it, you open it. Julian paused. The air at the table grew heavy. He wanted it. Elara could see the hunger in his eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was about owning something no one else could have. He reached for the checkbook lying next to his wine glass. 15 million, Julian murmured, uncapping a fountain pen. Elara finished pouring the water. As she pulled the pitcher back, her eyes fell on the watch, specifically on the small engraving on the side of the bezel. It was tiny, barely a scratch, but under the restaurant's lighting, she saw it. A small bird symbol. Her breath hitched, the symbol of the Vogel workshop in Dresden. The Vogel workshop didn't exist until 1945. Wilhelm II abdicated in 1918. The watch was a fake, a brilliant, masterful, multi-million-dollar fake. Elara froze. If she walked away, Julian Thorne would lose $15 million. He was a billionaire. He would survive. But the injustice of it clawed at her throat. It was the same type of fraud that had ruined her father. Slick men selling lies to powerful egos. Henry, the manager, was watching her from the station, his eyes warning her to move. Walk away, Elara. It's not your life. Julian's pen touched the paper. Herr Weber, Julian said. You have the transfer details? Ja, Franz beamed, his greed practically dripping off him. A Swiss account, very secure. Elara took a step back. Then she stopped. She couldn't do it. She couldn't let the lie win. She stepped back toward the table, pretending to adjust the placement of the breadbasket. She leaned in, perilously close to Julian Thorne's ear. The scent of Julian Thorne was intoxicating. Sandalwood and rain. Elara ignored it. She ignored the terrifying pounding of her own heart. She needed to be precise. If she spoke in English, Franz would hear her and deny it. It would become a scene. She needed to speak a language Franz claimed to be his own, but clearly wasn't comfortable in. She needed to speak the language of the watch. Entschuldigen Sie, mein Herr, she whispered, her voice barely a breath, yet crystalline in its clarity. Julian's hand froze. The pen stopped moving. He didn't look up, but his shoulders tensed. He was listening. She switched to flawless, high-dialect German, the kind spoken by academics and diplomats. Das ist keine echte Antiquität. Die Gravur an der Seite stammt aus der Vogelwerkstatt nach 1945. Betrügt sie. That is not a real antique. The engraving on the side is from the Vogel workshop, post-1945. He is scamming you. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it felt like a lifetime. Julian Thorne slowly capped his pen. The scratching sound of the cap clicking into place was loud in the quiet corner. Franz Weber looked confused. He hadn't heard exactly what she said, only that the waitress had whispered something. Is everything all right, Mr. Thorne? The service here is usually better trained. Julian lifted his head. For the first time, he looked at Elara. She expected anger. She expected him to dismiss her. Instead, she found herself locked in a gaze of piercing intensity. His slate-grey eyes swept over her face, dissecting her, analyzing her. He saw the cheap uniform, the messy bun, but he also saw the defiance in her blue eyes. He looked back at Franz. Franz, Julian said, his voice dangerously calm. You said this watch was commissioned in 1910, correct? Absolutely, Franz smiled, though his smile was faltering. Why do you ask? Julian picked up the watch. He didn't use the loop this time. He ran his thumb over the bezel, searching for what the waitress had seen. He found it. The tiny bird. My German is a little rusty, Julian lied smoothly, his eyes never leaving Franz's face. But this young woman just reminded me of something interesting. Franz's eyes darted to Ilara. The waitress? What does she know? She speaks better German than you do, Franz, Julian cut in, his voice dropping an octave. And she tells me that the Vogel mark on this bezel didn't exist until after the Second World War. The color drained from Franz Weber's face, so fast it looked like a magic trick. He opened his mouth, stammering. That is impossible. She is lying. She is trying to ruin the deal. Look at her, she is a nobody. A nobody who just saved me $15 million, Julian said. He stood up. The movement was fluid and threatening. Franz scrambled back, knocking over his wine glass. The crimson liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth like a gunshot wound. Mr. Thorne, please, I was deceived. My supplier, get out, Julian said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The authority in his voice was absolute. Leave the watch. Consider it a penalty for wasting my time. If I see you in New York again, I will buy every building you live in and evict you. Franz didn't hesitate. He grabbed his briefcase and scrambled out of the booth, rushing toward the exit, nearly colliding with Henri, the manager, who was running over with a look of pure panic. Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry, Henri gasped, looking from the spilled wine to the fleeing man. He turned his fury on Ilara. Vance, what did you do? You disturbed the guest. You are fired. Get your things and get out immediately. Ilara flinched. She knew this was coming. She lowered her head. Yes, Henri. Wait. The single word stopped Henri mid-shout. Julian Thorne was still standing. He picked up a napkin and calmly dabbed a spot of wine from his cuff. He looked at Henri with disdain, then turned his full attention to Ilara. She isn't fired, Julian said. In fact, I think she's done working for you entirely. Henri blinked, confused. Sir? Julian ignored the manager. He walked around the table, stopping inches from Ilara. Up close, he was overwhelming. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. What is your name? He asked. Ilara, she whispered. Ilara Vance. Ilara. He tested the name, as if tasting the wine. You have a good eye, Ilara, and a dangerous tongue. Where did a waitress at L'Etoile learn to identify a Vogel hallmark in High German? Ilara swallowed hard. My father taught me. He liked watches. He must have been a master, Julian noted. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a business card, and slipped it into the apron of her uniform. His fingers brushed her waist for a split second, sending a jolt of electricity through her. I have a problem, Ilara, Julian said softly, so only she could hear. That man, Franz, was just the middleman. I'm trying to acquire a collection in Berlin next week, a collection that makes this watch look like a toy. I need eyes that can see what mine can't. He stepped back. Be at the address on that card tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late. Julian Thorne threw a stack of $100 bills onto the wine-stained table, far more than the meal cost, and walked out into the rainy New York night, leaving the entire restaurant staring at the waitress who had just spoken to a king. Ilara stood frozen, her hand clutching the card in her apron pocket. The card was heavy, embossed black on black. Thorne Industries. She looked at Henri. The manager's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. Ilara untied her apron. She dropped it on the floor, right on top of the spilled wine. "I quit," she said. Wait for the next parts. I have outlined a complex web of deception, high society tension, and romance. In the next parts, Ilara will enter Julian's world, undergo a transformation, and they will travel to Berlin where the true danger awaits. Would you like me to continue with part 3 and 4 immediately? The Thorn Industries building didn't just scrape the sky, it pierced it. It was a monolith of black glass and steel standing in the heart of Manhattan, a fortress that looked down on the rest of the world. Ilara stood on the sidewalk at 8:55 a.m. The rain had stopped, leaving the city grey and humid. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue blazer she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago, a white blouse that had been ironed twice, and black trousers. It was professional, but against the backdrop of men in $5,000 suits and women carrying Birkin bags, she felt like she was wearing a costume made of paper. She pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was silent, vast, and intimidatingly white. Name? The receptionist didn't look up from her screen. She was a woman whose cheekbones looked sharp enough to cut glass. Ilara Vance, I have a meeting with Mr. Thorne. The receptionist stopped typing. She looked up, her eyes scanning Ilara from her sensible shoes to her messy bun. A flicker of amusement curled her lip. Mr. Thorne is in executive meetings until noon. He doesn't see... She's expected. The voice came from the elevators. A tall woman with fiery red hair and a dress that fit like a second skin walked toward them. She held a tablet like a weapon. This was Isabella Ross, Julian's executive assistant, and if rumors were true, the gatekeeper to his entire life. Isabella stopped in front of Ilara, towering over her in stilettos. "You're the waitress." It wasn't a question. It was an insult wrapped in a statement. "I am Ilara," she corrected, keeping her voice steady. Isabella gave a tight, fake smile. "He's waiting on the top floor. Don't touch anything. And don't get comfortable. Julian has a habit of collecting novelties. They usually last about a week." Ilara bit the inside of her cheek. "I'm not a novelty. I'm a consultant. We'll see." The elevator ride was a silent ascent that made Ilara's ears pop. When the doors opened on the 90th floor, the view took her breath away. The entire floor was open concept, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Julian Thorne was standing by the window, looking out at the Empire State Building as if he owned it. Maybe he did. He turned as Ilara entered. He wasn't wearing the suit jacket today, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that were surprisingly muscular. He looked less like a CEO and more like a predator at rest. "You're on time," Julian said. "I like that." "I need this job, Mr. Thorne," Ilara said, clutching her bag strap. "But I need to know what it is. You mentioned a collection in Berlin." Julian walked over to a large mahogany desk. On it sat 3 objects: a small jade statue, a silver dagger with a ruby hilt, and a leather-bound book that looked centuries old. "Before we go to Berlin," Julian said, resting his hands on the desk, "I need to know if yesterday was luck or skill. My reputation is on the line. If I bring an amateur into the Schwarzer Markt, the black market auction, they will eat you alive." He gestured to the 3 items. "One of these is a fake. The other 2 are priceless. You have 60 seconds. Tell me which one is the lie." Ilara stepped forward. Her heart was pounding, but as soon as her eyes landed on the objects, the world slowed down. This was her language. This was the world she had been born into before the poverty took it away. She looked at the jade statue. It was heavy, the carving intricate. She looked at the book. The leather was cracked, the smell distinctly musty. She looked at the dagger. Time ticked by. Isabella was watching from the doorway, a smirk playing on her lips, waiting for Ilara to fail. Ilara didn't touch them. She didn't need to. 40 seconds, Julian said. Ilara pointed at the book. The Bible. Julian raised an eyebrow. That is a 17th century Gutenberg imprint. It was authenticated by the British Museum. It's a very good forgery, Ilara said, her voice gaining strength. But it's a forgery. Explain. The wear pattern on the spine, Ilara said, pointing. It suggests it was held open frequently by a right-handed reader. But the oxidation on the pages, the yellowing, is uniform. A real book of that age, read that often, would have uneven oxidation where the thumbs turned the pages. Someone aged the paper chemically, dipping the entire block at once. It's too perfect. History is messy, Mr. Thorne. That book is clean. Silence filled the room. Isabella's smirk vanished. Julian stared at the book, then at Ilara. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It changed his entire demeanor, making him look younger, yet infinitely more intense. It cost me $200,000 to learn that lesson 3 years ago, Julian admitted, and you spotted it in 30 seconds without a magnifying glass. He picked up the silver dagger and tossed it to Isabella, who caught it clumsily. Put this in the vault and get the car. We're leaving. Leaving? Isabella blinked. But the board meeting. Cancel it, Julian said, his eyes locked on Ilara. Ilara isn't just a consultant, Isabella. She's my ticket to the von Adler estate. He walked around the desk and stopped in front of Ilara. He was close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. The von Adler estate, Ilara whispered. Her knees felt weak. That's a myth. The family disappeared in 1950. Their collection includes the Romanov eggs, the lost Vermeer. It's not a myth, Julian said, his voice low and rough. It's surfacing in Berlin in 2 days. Invitation only. And the only way to get in is to prove you have the eye. I have the money, Ilara, but you have the sight. He reached out and gently pulled a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, his touch startlingly gentle. Pack your things, Ilara. You're not going back to that restaurant. The Gulfstream G650 was more like a flying penthouse than an airplane. The interior was lined with cream leather and walnut wood. Ilara sat in a seat that was wider than her bed, back in her tiny Queen's apartment. They had been in the air for 2 hours. Julian was sitting across from her, typing furiously on his laptop. He had barely spoken since takeoff, but the air between them crackled with an unspoken tension. Ilara looked down at her hands. They were red and rough from years of scrubbing dishes and carrying hot plates. She hid them under the cashmere blanket the flight attendant had given her. Stop doing that, Julian said, without looking up from his screen. Ilara jumped. Doing what? Hiding. Julian closed his laptop. He looked at her, his gaze drifting to her hands. You have working hands. There is no shame in that. My grandfather was a steel worker in Pittsburgh. He had hands like leather. Ilara relaxed her grip on the blanket slightly. You don't look like a steelworker's grandson. Money changes the surface, Julian said, reaching for a glass of scotch. It doesn't change the bone. I worked my way out of the gutter, Ilara, just like you are doing right now. He pressed a button on the console. A moment later, a flight attendant appeared, carrying a large garment bag and several shoeboxes. She hung the bag on the hook near the cabin door and set the boxes down. Go change, Julian commanded. Ilara looked at the bag. Excuse me? We are landing in Berlin in 4 hours. When we get off this plane, you are not Ilara Vance, the waitress. You are Ilara Vance, the curator of the Thorne private collection. You need to look the part. Elara stood up, her legs shaky. She took the bag to the opulent bathroom at the back of the plane. When she unzipped the bag, she gasped. Inside was a dress of deep emerald silk. It was modest, but cut in a way that suggested elegance and power. It was a designer piece, something she had only seen in magazines. The shoes were black Louboutins. She stripped off her thrift store clothes and slipped into the silk. It felt like water against her skin. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. How did he know her size? She let her hair down, shaking out the blonde waves that had been confined in a bun for years. She applied a little lipstick she found in a vanity kit. When she opened the door and stepped back into the cabin, Julian was pouring himself another drink. He stopped mid-pour. The scotch overflowed the glass, spilling onto the expensive table, but Julian didn't notice. He stared at her. His slate-grey eyes darkened, the pupils dilating. Elara stood there, feeling exposed yet empowered. The dress made her stand taller. She wasn't the invisible girl anymore. "Well?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is it adequate?" Julian swallowed. He set the bottle down slowly. He stood up and walked toward her. The cabin was silent, except for the hum of the engines. "Adequate," Julian murmured, his voice raspy. "Is not the word I would use." He stopped a foot away from her. The air pressure in the cabin seemed to drop. "You look dangerous, Elara. You look like a queen." Elara felt a blush rise up her neck. "I'm just an employee, Mr. Thorne." "Julian," he corrected. "If we are going to survive Berlin, you have to call me Julian." "Okay. Julian." The name felt heavy on her tongue. "Tell me," Julian said, leaning against the cabin wall, crossing his arms. "Why did your father fall? You mentioned he was a master." I looked up the name Vance. There are records of a William Vance, a brilliant horologist, who was accused of swapping internals on a Duke's collection in 2019. Elara's face hardened. The old anger flared up. "He didn't do it. He was framed. He was hired to restore the collection. But when he opened the watches, the internals were already swapped. He reported it. But the owner was a powerful man. He accused my father of the theft to cover his own insurance fraud. My father went to prison. He died there of a heart attack 6 months ago." She looked Julian in the eye. "That's why I spoke up in the restaurant. I hate liars, and I hate men who use their power to crush the truth." Julian studied her face. He saw the pain, but he also saw the steel spine beneath it. "I believe you," Julian said softly. "You do?" Elara was surprised. "Why? You don't know me." "Because I know about the man who ruined your father," Julian said darkly. "Lord Sterling, he's a snake, and he's going to be in Berlin." Elara's breath hitched. "Sterling is going to be there?" "He is the one selling the von Adler collection," Julian revealed, dropping the bomb. "He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he's going to sell a vault full of stolen history and get away with it." Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not going to Berlin just to buy art, Elara. I'm going to destroy Sterling. I'm going to prove the collection is stolen, and I'm going to clear your father's name." Elara felt tears prick her eyes. "Why? Why would you do that for me?" "Because," Julian said, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second, "I hate liars too." Suddenly, the plane banked sharply. The fasten seatbelt sign flashed red. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with tension. "Mr. Thorne, sit down. Now, we have a situation." Julian grabbed Elara's arm to steady her as the plane lurched. "What is it?" he barked toward the cockpit. "We have 2 bogies on our tail, sir. Unmarked jets. They're trying to force us down." Elara's eyes went wide with terror. "What does that mean?" Julian's face shifted from the charming billionaire to the ruthless operator. He pulled Alara into the seat and buckled her in, his hands moving fast. "It means," Julian said, looking out the window at the dark clouds where two shadows were moving closer, "that Sterling knows we're coming, and he's not planning on letting us land." He looked at Alara, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for her. "Hold on to me, Alara," he commanded, as the plane entered a steep dive. "Do not let go." Wait for the next parts. I have escalated the stakes from a business deal to a life-or-death situation. We have introduced a villain, Sterling, connected to Alara's past, creating a personal revenge motive. In the next parts, they must survive the landing, navigate the hostile streets of Berlin, and infiltrate the auction. Would you like me to continue with part 5 and 6? Gravity was a physical weight, crushing Alara against the cream leather seat. The screams of the jet engines drowned out her own terrified gasp as the plane dove toward the earth at an impossible angle. "Look at me, Alara." Julian's voice cut through the chaos. He was leaning over her, his hand gripping the armrest beside her head, his knuckles white. His eyes were fierce, anchoring her in the spinning world. "Trust me. My pilots are former RAF. They know what they're doing." The cabin shuddered violently. Overhead, bins popped open, spilling oxygen masks that dangled like grotesque jungle vines. Through the window, the dark German countryside was rushing up to meet them at terrifying speed. The hostile jets were gone, having done their job of forcing them out of the commercial flight path. "We're coming in hot to a secondary airfield outside Potsdam," the pilot shouted over the intercom. "Brace for impact." Julian covered Alara's body with his own as the landing gear deployed with a deafening groan. The tires hit the tarmac with a violence that threw them forward against their restraints. The plane bounced once, twice, then slammed down, skidding sideways. The screech of burning rubber smelled like acrid fear. They came to a stop inches from a snow-covered embankment. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the engines. "Are you hurt?" Julian demanded, his hands immediately cupping her face, checking for injuries. I think I'm okay," Alara breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was shaking violently. "Good, we have to move, now." Julian unbuckled her. "Leave everything. The bag, the shoes. Just come." The flight attendant had already cracked the cabin door open. A rush of freezing, damp air flooded the luxurious cabin. They descended the stairs onto a desolate, snow-dusted airfield. The only light came from a single hangar 50 yards away. It was bitter cold, the kind that bites through silk in seconds. Alara shivered violently in her thin emerald dress. Before her feet even touched the frozen ground, Julian shrugged off his cashmere coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her frame, smelling of his sandalwood scent and residual warmth. "They were trying to kill us," Alara whispered, the reality finally sinking in as she looked at the smoking tires of the jet. "Yes," Julian said, his jaw tight. He was scanning the perimeter, his body rigid. Sterling doesn't play games. He was hoping for a tragic accident over the Atlantic. Now, he has to deal with us on the ground. 3 matte black armored SUVs roared out of the darkness from the direction of the hangar, their headlights blinding. They skidded to a halt in front of the plane. Doors flew open, and 6 massive men in tactical gear spilled out, carrying assault rifles. Alara instinctively stepped back, but Julian put a hand on the small of her back, pushing her forward. "It's okay. They're mine." The lead guard, a scarred giant of a man named Klaus, nodded sharply to Julian. "Herr Thorn, we tracked the diversion. You have 20 minutes before local authorities arrive, and Sterling's payroll extends to the Potsdam police. Get us to the safe house. Route Bravo, Julian commanded, guiding Ilara into the middle SUV. The door slammed shut, sealing them inside a soundproof, bulletproof cocoon. The convoy tore out of the airfield, tires crunching on gravel before hitting the asphalt of a dark country road. They were moving fast, dangerously fast, through the dense black forests surrounding Berlin. Ilara sat huddled in Julian's oversized coat. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a sickening crash. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of fear, exhaustion, and overwhelming relief. I used to just serve coffee, she choked out, a hysterical laugh escaping her lips. Yesterday, my biggest problem was Henri yelling at me for using the wrong fork. Today, I almost died in a plane crash because of a stolen art collection. Julian reached across the console and took her icy hand in his warm, large one. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her hand tightly. I apologize, Julian said, his voice low and intense in the dark car. I knew Sterling was dangerous. I didn't think he'd be desperate enough to strike before we even landed. I put you in the line of fire. You didn't put me there, Ilara said, looking out the window at the blurring pine trees. Lord Sterling did. The man who killed my father. She turned to look at Julian, her blue eyes hardening in the dim light. I'm not running away, Julian. If he wants a war, let's give him one. Julian squeezed her hand. A look of profound respect crossed his features, replacing the usual arrogance. We will, Ilara. Tomorrow night, we walk into his world, and we burn it down from the inside. The safe house wasn't a house at all. It was a brutalist concrete bunker, disguised as an ultra-modern architectural masterpiece, hidden deep in the affluent forested suburb of Grunewald. The convoy pulled into an underground garage that sealed behind them with a heavy hydraulic hiss. Klaus and his team secured the perimeter, while Julian led Ilara up a private elevator. The penthouse apartment was vast, cold, and minimalist. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the dark canopy of the Grunewald forest toward the distant, glittering skyline of Berlin. It was beautiful, but stark. Whiskey. Neat, Julian ordered Klaus, who had followed them up. He turned to Ilara. You need something stronger than water. Ilara nodded numbly. She was still wearing his coat over the silk dress, her bare feet numb from the brief walk on the tarmac. Julian noticed her shivering. He walked over to a sleek, wall-mounted fireplace and pressed a button. Gas flames erupted through black river stones, casting a warm, flickering glow across the grey room. Sit by the fire, he said gently. I'll find you something dry to wear. Ilara sat on the plush wool rug in front of the fire, holding her hands out to the heat. She felt untethered from reality. She heard Julian moving around in another room. He returned a moment later, carrying a thick grey cashmere sweater and a pair of wool socks. It's mine, so it will be big, he said, handing them to her. The bathroom is through that door. Hot water, steam shower. Take your time. 40 minutes later, Ilara emerged. She had scrubbed the fear off her skin under scalding water. She was drowning in Julian's sweater, the sleeves rolled up 3 times, and wearing the oversized socks. Her hair was damp, drying in natural waves around her face. She found Julian standing by the massive window, holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He had changed into dark jeans and a black t-shirt that clung to his chest. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like the street fighter he claimed to have been. He turned as she entered. His eyes swept over her, lingering on the way his sweater hung off her small frame. A muscle in his jaw ticked. Better? He asked. Much, Ilara said softly. She walked over to where he stood, drawn to his presence and the view of the city that was currently hunting them. Here." He handed her a glass of aged bourbon. "Drink." She took a sip. It burned pleasantly all the way down, chasing away the last of the tarmac chill. "Where are we?" she asked, looking out at the lights. "Grunewald. It used to be where the Prussian royalty hunted," Julian said, swirling his drink. "Now it's where people like me hide." He turned from the window to face her fully. The firelight danced in his slate-grey eyes. The intensity of the flight had shifted into something else, something thicker, heavier, and far more dangerous than an airplane dive. "Elara," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "About what happened up there. When I thought we weren't going to make it." He stopped, struggling for words, a man used to commands finding himself tongue-tied. "You saved me," she whispered, stepping closer. "No," Julian corrected harshly. "I endangered you." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before finally cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed against her jawline, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met. You see the truth in things, in watches, in books, in people." Elara leaned slightly into his touch. Her heart, which had just calmed down, began to race again. They were alone in a concrete fortress, hundreds of feet above a hostile city. The rest of the world felt very far away. "What do you see when you look at me, Elara?" he asked, his voice roughened by scotch and emotion. Elara looked up into his eyes. She didn't see the ruthless tycoon the magazines wrote about. She saw a man carrying the weight of a self-made empire, a man fiercely protective, and currently a man who looked hungry. "I see someone who is tired of being lied to," she said softly. Julian let out a shaky breath. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his mouth found hers. It wasn't a gentle, movie star kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of bourbon and adrenaline. His other hand found her waist, pulling her against him until there was no air left between them. Elara melted into him, her hands gripping the t-shirt at his shoulders. It was an affirmation of life after brushing so close to death. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, both of them breathing heavily. "We shouldn't," he murmured, though he didn't let go. "I'm your employer. This crosses lines." "You crossed the line when you kidnapped me from a restaurant," Elara retorted breathlessly, a faint smile touching her lips. Julian chuckled, a low, rumbling sound against her chest. He pulled back slightly to look at her. The intensity was back in his eyes, but now it was focused on the mission. "You're right. We need to focus. Tomorrow is everything." He led her over to a large dining table made of reclaimed wood. On it lay a sleek black briefcase. Julian opened it. Inside were two items, a heavy cream card embossed with gold leaf and a mask. "The Von Adler auction," Julian explained, his business demeanor sliding back into place, though his eyes remained hot. "It's being held at the Charlottenburg Palace tomorrow night. Sterling is obsessed with the Baroque era. He's turning it into a masquerade ball. It's arrogant. He thinks masks will protect his buyer's anonymity while they purchase stolen goods." Elara picked up the invitation. It was heavy, scented with something cloying and expensive. "And the mask?" she asked. Julian lifted it from the velvet lining. It was exquisite, a half-mask made of black lace and tiny dark sapphires that caught the firelight. It was elegant, mysterious, and terribly expensive. "Tomorrow night, you are not Elara Vance," Julian said, holding the mask up to her face. His eyes locked onto hers through the eye holes. "You are the curator of the Thorn collection. You are untouchable. You are the smartest person in that room, and you are going to find the crack in Sterling's armor." He lowered the mask, We're walking into the lion's den, Ilara. Are you ready to bite back? Ilara took the mask from him. The sapphires felt cold against her fingertips. She thought of her father, dying in a prison cell because of Sterling's greed. I'm ready, she said, her voice steely. Let's go hunting. Wait for the final part. The stakes have never been higher. They have survived the journey and established a fragile, intense bond. Now they must enter the Charlottenburg Palace, face Lord Sterling, and expose the fraud in front of the world's elite. The climax approaches. Would you like me to write the final part 7 and the conclusion now? The great hall of Charlottenburg Palace was a fever dream of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers, and Baroque excess. Hundreds of masked figures moved through the room like ghosts in satin and velvet. A string quartet played Mozart, the music floating over the low hum of billionaires discussing the price of history. Ilara walked arm in arm with Julian. Her emerald dress caught the light, and the sapphire mask obscured everything but her piercing blue eyes and the set of her jaw. She felt terrified, but Julian's arm was a solid bar of iron beneath her hand. Stay close, Julian murmured, his lips brushing her ear. Sterling is holding court near the dais. He's watching everyone. They moved through the crowd. Ilara felt eyes on her, curious, assessing. No one knew who she was. To them, she was just the mystery woman on the arm of the American tech tycoon. At the front of the room, standing beside a velvet-roped podium, was Lord Sterling. He was a tall, skeletal man in a silver Venetian mask, exuding an aura of untouchable arrogance. Julian? Sterling's voice was oily, sliding through the noise. He stepped forward, blocking their path. I heard you had some engine trouble on the way in. How dreadful. Just a little turbulence, Sterling, Julian said, his voice icy. It takes more than a bumpy ride to keep me away from the Von Adler collection. Sterling laughed, a dry, rasping sound. He looked at Ilara. And who is this? A new acquisition? You Americans treat women like you treat art, expensive accessories for the season. Ilara felt Julian tense, ready to snap, but she squeezed his arm. Not yet. I am the curator of Mr. Thorne's collection, Ilara said, her voice steady and cool. She tilted her chin up. And I hear you have a centerpiece that defies explanation. Sterling's eyes narrowed behind his mask. The Celestial Swan, a masterwork of 18th century automation. It has been lost for 70 years. Tonight it returns. He gestured to the podium. A heavy velvet cloth covered a large object. Enjoy the show, Sterling sneered, turning away to greet a Saudi prince. The lights dimmed. The auctioneer, a man with a gavel that looked like a judge's mallet, took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer boomed. We proceed immediately to the highlight of the evening, Lot 45, the Von Adler Celestial Swan. 2 assistants pulled the cloth away. The room gasped. It was a silver swan, life-sized, sitting on a bed of twisted crystal waves. Its feathers were individual sheets of beaten silver. Its eyes were rubies. It was breathtaking. Bidding starts at $50 million, the auctioneer announced. 55, shouted a voice from the back. 60, countered the Saudi prince. 100 million, Julian said calmly. The room went dead silent. Heads turned. Sterling smiled smugly from the side of the stage. He was about to become a very rich man. 100 million going once, the auctioneer began. Wait. The single word rang out like a bell. It wasn't Julian. It was Ilara. She stepped away from Julian, moving toward the stage. The crowd parted for her, confused. Security guards took a step forward, but Julian raised a hand, his glare daring them to move. This object is not for sale, Ilara announced, her voice projecting clearly through the silent hall. Sterling stormed onto the stage. "What is the meaning of this? Get this woman out of here!" "You claim this is the Von Adler Swan," Ilara said, walking up the steps, ignoring the guards. "Lost since 1950, but you and I both know that's a lie, Lord Sterling." "How dare you!" Sterling hissed, his face flushing red. "I have certificates of authenticity. I have the provenance." "You have forgeries." Ilara ripped off her mask. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Her face was bare, fierce, and beautiful. "My name is Ilara Vance, daughter of William Vance." Sterling froze. The color drained from his face. He knew that name. It was the name of the man he had framed and destroyed. "My father didn't steal from you, Sterling," Ilara shouted, turning to address the stunned audience. "He was restoring this very swan when he discovered what you had done. You swapped the internal movements of the Duke's collection and sold the originals on the black market. When he found out, you framed him to silence him." "Lies! She is crazy!" Sterling screamed, pointing a shaking finger. "Security! Arrest her!" "If it's a lie," Ilara challenged, stepping up to the silver swan, "then why does this swan have a heartbeat?" She reached out. Sterling lunged to stop her, but Julian was there in a blur of motion. He slammed into Sterling, pinning the older man against the podium with a brutal shove. "Let her finish," Julian growled, holding Sterling down. Ilara placed her hands on the silver bird. She didn't touch the winding key. Instead, she pressed a hidden sequence of feathers on the left wing, a sequence her father had whispered to her during a prison visit, a secret failsafe he had installed years ago. 1, 3, 7. Click. A mechanical whir filled the room. The swan didn't flap its wings. Instead, its chest cavity hissed and slid open. Inside, amidst the complex gears and springs, sat a small, sealed glass tube. Ilara pulled it out. She held it up to the light. "My father knew you would kill him," Ilara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "So he hid the proof inside the one thing he knew you were too greedy to destroy. He knew you'd eventually try to sell the swan." She handed the tube to the head of the German police, who had just burst through the doors, led by Julian's head of security, Klaus. The officer cracked the seal and pulled out a roll of microfilm and a handwritten ledger. "It's all here," the officer said, looking at the documents. "The black market sales, the bribes, the setup of William Vance." Sterling slumped in Julian's grip. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a terrified old man. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," Sterling whimpered. "She was just a waitress." Julian released him, shoving him toward the police. He walked over to Ilara, who was standing next to the swan, shaking. "No," Julian said, loud enough for the world to hear. He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "She is the queen." As the police dragged Sterling away in handcuffs, flashing cameras erupted like fireworks, but Ilara didn't see them. She only saw Julian. "We did it," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "He's free. My father's name is clean." "You did it," Julian corrected. He pulled her into his arms, right there on the stage, surrounded by billions of dollars of art and the wreckage of a corrupt empire. "I just bought the plane tickets." He looked down at her, his eyes soft. "So, Ilara Vance, you just took down the biggest art fraud in history. You're officially overqualified to be a waitress. What do you want to do now?" Ilara looked at the silver swan, then at the man who had believed in her when she was invisible. "I think," she smiled, "I'd like to curate a private collection, but I have a very high fee." Julian grinned, the first true, unburdened smile she had ever seen on him. He leaned in and kissed her, a promise sealed in front of the elite of Europe. "Name your price," he whispered against her lips. "Your heart," she said. "Sold," Julian whispered back. To the lady in the emerald dress. What a journey. From a waitress invisible to the world to the woman who brought down an empire. Ilara proved that true worth isn't about money or status. It's about integrity, skill, and the courage to speak the truth when everyone else stays silent. She didn't just save a billionaire, she saved herself and her father's legacy. I have a question for you. If you saw a scam happening in front of you, but speaking up meant risking your job, would you have the courage to do what Ilara did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and high-stakes drama, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for watching.